I remember that night with perfect clarity. It was a quiet night, so still you couldn't even hear the wind. Gathered in the living room of my house were my son and his wife, and one other man I was meeting for the very first time. Him. He was introduced as my daughter-in-law's brother, and the man wore a constant smile, speaking in a voice that carried clearly through the room. He was dressed in a black suit with a dark gray tie, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. I'd have put him in his early 40s. The way he spoke, the way he carried himself, it was all polished, refined. Like a senior vice president of sales from some big corporation. It's a real honor to finally meet you, sir. Thank you so much for making time for me today. Really, a pleasure. I just nodded. For the first few minutes, the conversation was the kind of small talk you could have anywhere. The weather, the recent jump in prices at the gas station, the selection at the local grocery store. But as the drinks started to flow, a strange new vocabulary began to creep into the man's speech. And so, you see, we have this new real estate investment venture we're rolling out. It's a structure that allows us to minimize the initial capital outlay by, let's say, borrowing the good name of a trusted individual. It allows us to maximize our line of credit. Credit. Collateral. Title. Pretending to lift my glass to my lips, I moved only my eyes. I looked at his eyes. His words were smiling, but his eyes were cold. It was a calculated emptiness, a chillingly blank stare. And I had seen those eyes before. They were eyes from the past. Back then, I used to stare into eyes just like those almost every single night. Negotiations, gambles, deceptions. No matter how you dressed up the words, the eyes never lied. And who was it that first came up with this plan? I asked quietly. For a split second, the man's words caught in his throat. Then, just as quickly, he laughed it off. Well, it was a joint concept, of course, developed by my partner and me. But if we could get someone with a strong credit history like yourself on board, sir, it would give us a great deal of peace of mind and… The evening ended there. Nothing was decided. Nothing was refused. The night deepened, leaving us all in a haze of ambiguity. But in my mind, I had already arrived at my answer. A week later, my son showed up at the house unannounced. He placed a thick manila envelope on the table in front of me. Dad, can you do me a small favor? Just sign this for me, will you? What is it? Oh, it's nothing major. It's just… We need to borrow your name for a little while. It'll be over before you know it, I promise. It won't cause you any trouble. TSB. RO my name. Did he really believe such a thing existed in this world? I remained silent as I opened the envelope and examined its contents. There, printed in stark black ink, were phrases that carried an undeniable weight. Joint guarantor. Real estate collateral, loan agreement. Whose contract is this? I asked, my voice low and steady. As I spoke, the door to the dining room slid open. That man appeared again. Hello again. So sorry to intrude. I know you're a busy man. He bowed his head in a theatrical display of respect and placed a business card on the table. The company name was one I'd never seen before, but on the back, printed in smaller type, were the words, affiliated with Sterling Development Corp. And Trident Loan Center. With your name on the application, sir, the approval process will go much more smoothly. And of course, should anything go wrong, we will cover any and all potential risks. We'll cover everything? How many times had I heard that line? I knew from hard-won experience that in the world he came from, the phrase, we'll cover everything, was a guarantee of absolutely nothing. In that instant, I pushed my chair back and stood up. I began to, slowly, deliberately, roll up the sleeve of my shirt. I could feel the man's eyes lock onto the movement of my hands. As the pattern etched into my right shoulder was gradually revealed, the very air in the room seemed to shift, to grow heavy and cold. It was a tattoo of a peony, the colors long since faded. It was inked more than 30 years ago. But its presence, its meaning, remained as potent as ever. What? A dumbfounded sound escaped the man's lips. The color drained from his face in an instant, and his hands began to tremble. I stared directly into his eyes and spoke. This is my signature. It's more binding than any pen. Silence. My son, my daughter-in-law, they could say nothing. They just stood there, frozen. The man, leaving his business card and the envelope on the table, said nothing more. He simply backed away, step by step, and then turned and fled toward the front door as if his life depended on it. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty, even if I had thrown away my past, the will to call back the man I once was, if it meant protecting what I held dear, was still alive inside of me. This, I realized, was the true beginning. My name is Arthur Rossi. I am 76 years old. To look at me now, you would see what everyone else sees, just another old man. In the mornings, I tend the small garden in my backyard. In the afternoons, I might take a walk down to the local diner for a cup of coffee. In the evenings, I watch travel shows on television, a glass of lukewarm whiskey in my hand, surrounded by my son, his wife, and my grandchild. My days are a quiet rhythm of laughter and silence. This life is what I call peace. It is also, in its own way, my penance. But no one knows. No, I believed there was no reason for them to ever know. No one could imagine that inside this aging body, there once lived something that was not quite human, something that men once feared, something whose name they hesitated to even speak. Chicago. The Moretti family. From the late 70s through the end of the 80s, there wasn't a soul in the underworld who didn't know the name. I was there, serving as the underboss, holding the family together. I lived my life in a world of blood, contracts, and silence. There were times I held a man's life in my hands, and times I was prepared to give up my own. I walked that path with a certain pride, even as I was chained by the code we called honor. Cost it. Until that day. It was the winter of 1988. One of our own, a man I trusted like a brother, committed an act of betrayal. That single act ignited a war. For 3 days and 3 nights, the streets of the city were painted red. Gunshots, shouts of anger, betrayal, and finally, despair. It was then, for the first time, that I made the decision to end it. I dismantled the family. I helped my men scatter to different parts of the country, to disappear. And I let a rumor circulate that I myself had been killed. Then I left. I moved to a quiet corner of Cleveland, as far from my old territory as I could get, and I opened a small diner. I hung an open sign in the window, covered my hands in flour, and let the sweat run down my face in the heat of the kitchen. A life where I could simply say, I am alive, and have it mean just that. I never knew what a luxury that was until the day I first held a chef's knife, in hands that were stained with blood. I still dream about those days running the diner. Waking up at 4 in the morning, sifting flour, mixing it with water to make the dough, letting it rest, then cutting it. Everything was a precise, practiced form, with no wasted motion. I remember one day, while I was slicing scallions, I suddenly realized that I was unconsciously drawing the knife from my right hip, as if pulling it from a holster. By the time the sharp green scent filled the air, the scallions were already perfectly minced, the knife creating a light, steady rhythm on the cutting board. You handle that knife like a surgeon, Art, one of the regulars said with a laugh. I laughed along with him, but somewhere deep inside, my heart stung with a familiar ache. Because there was a time when I really had drawn something from that same spot. It took me years to reach a point where I could feel truly grateful that the object in my hand was just a kitchen knife. But a shadow eventually fell over that life too. My wife, Eleanor, collapsed. It was a heart condition she'd had for years. The call from the hospital was so quiet, so merciless. Mr. Rossi, I'm so sorry. Your wife, she's gone. I couldn't say a word. I just stood there behind the diner, staring at the cracked asphalt of the alley. After all the lives I had taken, all the power I had wielded, I couldn't even save the one person who meant everything to me. After Eleanor died, I sealed away every last piece of my past. I stopped even looking at the peony tattoo on my back. Every single day, I focused on one thing and one thing only: raising my son as a normal father. I never told Michael anything about my past. Even if I had, he wouldn't have understood. More than that, I never wanted him to know. My dad was just a guy who ran a diner. That was enough. That was all he ever needed to know. At dusk, in the empty living room, I would often find myself staring at the framed photograph of my wife on the mantelpiece. In the slightly faded picture, she wore the same gentle smile she always had. "Hey, can you hear me?" I wondered how many months it had been since I'd last spoken aloud to her. A mix of bashfulness, nostalgia, and a small, sharp sliver of regret churned in my chest. I'm keeping my promise, you know. I haven't gone back to that world. I haven't laid a hand on anyone, and I've left the old name behind. Every day, I just think about our boy, and I live an honest life. I press my hands together, closing my eyes for a moment. But the next words felt stuck in my throat, hard to form. But if he gets himself tangled up with the wrong kind of people, I'm not just going to stand by and watch. No matter how old I get, the things a man has to protect, he protects. In that moment, it felt as though something I had locked away deep in my soul had silently, slowly, opened its eyes. Her smile in the photograph said nothing, yet it seemed to forgive everything, a constant, peaceful presence in the room. My son's field days, his first day of school, his graduation. I was there with a camera, just like all the other fathers, shouting encouragement, waving from the sidelines. I did everything I could to make sure no one ever saw the real me. Eventually, I sold the diner. I could feel my age catching up with me, but more than that, I felt that my role there was finished. In the quiet of my own home, I spent my days pulling weeds in the garden, reading the newspaper, and listening for the occasional sound of my son's family coming to visit. I used to think to myself, this was the right way. This was good. The sins of killing a man never wash away. I knew that. But I believed that the only way I could atone was to live out the rest of my days making life, not taking it. But life rarely goes the way you plan. I never dreamed that my past would reappear before me, and I certainly never imagined it would be delivered by a man wearing the face of family. "Dad, my brother-in-law is coming to town. He said he'd like to meet you." When my daughter-in-law Sarah mentioned it, I just gave a small nod. Just a friendly hello, I thought. That's all it is. But at that moment, I had no way of knowing that this friendly hello would be the thing that would silently shatter the 30 years of silence I had fought so hard to maintain. In the early evening, I always listened for the sounds of my son coming home. The squeak of the front door, the thud of his shoes on the mat, and his slightly deeper voice calling out, "I'm home." He's over 40 now. His voice has fully settled into that of a father. His conversations with his wife, once a bit awkward, are now easy and natural. And since my grandson was born, the house is rarely without the sound of laughter. Sometimes, as I'm ladling soup for dinner, I pause and think to myself, how much I wish these days could last forever. One Sunday morning, my son, Michael, said it out of the blue. "You gotta live a long time, Dad. We're gonna be counting on you for a long while, at least until the little guy is all grown up." At the time, I just smiled and said, "Yeah, I'll try." But inside, I was turning his words over and over again, savoring them. Maybe this was the moment I had been waiting for, ever since the day I locked away my past and decided to become a normal father. The day I finally felt accepted, as a father, as a grandfather. I never, ever imagined that the same son, from that same mouth, would one day ask me to put our family home up as collateral for a loan. And that is why it hurts so much more. "Would you be free for dinner this Friday?" Sarah, my daughter-in-law, asked me one evening. It was an unusual request. Their weekdays were always packed, and they usually just stopped by on a weekend with my grandson for a short visit. For her to specifically ask me to dinner on a weeknight felt off. It snagged at the back of my mind. Is it a special occasion? Oh no, not really. It's just, my brother is in town from New York. He said he would really love to meet you. Her brother. Right. I'd heard bits and pieces about him over the years. That he ran some kind of company in the city. that he drove a fancy European car. To be honest, the stories were always vague, lacking any real substance. I gave a slight nod and accepted the invitation. But as I did, I felt a tiny, distinct bell chime somewhere deep inside me. When I arrived at the restaurant that night, the three of them were already seated. The moment I walked in, Michael stood up and greeted me with a wide smile. "Over here, Dad. Come on, let me introduce you. This is..." I gave a polite nod as I came face to face with my daughter-in-law's brother for the first time. My first impression was that he was too polished. His haircut, his suit, his shoes, even the faint scent of his cologne. Everything screamed of a manufactured, artificial cleanliness. And then there were his eyes. "A pleasure to finally meet you, sir. I've heard so much about you. It's an honor to meet you in person." His expression was soft, his words polite. The way he held his wine glass was as smooth and practiced as an actor playing a businessman on television. But deep within his eyes, there was a strange, unsettling heat. After we toasted, he seamlessly took control of the conversation. He talked about his business in New York, the real estate market overseas, the future of cryptocurrency. He rattled off one buzzword after another, occasionally turning the conversation back to me. "Property values around here have been on the rise, haven't they? By the way, your house, sir? About how old is it?" I swirled the ice in my glass, answering quietly, "Getting close to 30 years now. It's nothing special." "Oh, I wouldn't say that. When it comes to real estate appreciation, location is much more important than age. Just being close to the train station makes a huge difference in its collateral value." Radic. Collateral? The moment I heard that word, I felt my brow twitch involuntarily. The man, seeing my reaction, continued without missing a beat, a placid look on his face. "Oh, forgive me. I've been looking at deals like this all day. It's become an occupational hazard. My apologies." He was feigning an apology, but his eyes weren't smiling. In fact, they were watching me, observing my every reaction. It was as if this was all part of a test, a way of probing for weakness. In that instant, a feeling I had suppressed for decades awoke within me. I knew these eyes. These were the eyes of a man who could smell money, who looked for openings, who read the hidden corners of a person's heart. These were the same eyes I had stared into countless times in the old world. "By the way," he continued, "is the title to the house in your name, sir?" I set my fork down and looked him squarely in the eye. "Why are you so interested in that?" He blinked once, then his smile returned. "Oh, I'm so sorry, really. It's just professional curiosity. But a house, it's an asset you want to protect for generations. I hear so many stories about inheritances and estates these days." He was smooth. His words were smooth, but that very smoothness was a sign of the danger he represented. I said nothing more. I just listened to the clink of ice in my glass and thought to myself, "You don't need to ask. I can see it in your eyes. This is not just a family dinner." Ow. When I got home that night, I went to the mantelpiece and stood before Eleanor's picture. It looked back at me, as quiet and unchanging as ever. "Eleanor," I heard myself whisper. I knew there would be no reply, but I couldn't stop the words from coming. Something's not right. An unpleasant wind has started to blow. I've lived a quiet life all these years, just like I promised. But if they're trying to use our family, trying to turn them into tools for their own gain, I won't stand for it. The woman in the photograph just kept smiling, as if to say, "I know. Are you ready?" I walked over to a bookshelf and reached deep into the back of a cabinet I hadn't opened in years. My fingers found a small, cool ring of keys. They were the keys to an old steel lockbox, the box that held my entire past. I had no intention of opening it, not yet, but I knew that if they took one more step into my home, into my life, I would have to be ready to once again show them the man I used to be. That step came in a way I never expected. One morning, my son came over a little earlier than usual. As I sat with a steaming cup of coffee, he began speaking in an overly careful, deliberate tone. "Dad, I have a little favor to ask." In his hand was a thick manila envelope. I said nothing, just stared at it. I was hoping you could sign this. It's not a big deal, really. We just need to borrow your name. It's temporary, it'll be over soon. Slowly, I reached out and took the envelope. Inside, I found several pages of what were clearly contract documents, neatly stapled together. What kind of contract is this? Well, it's a kind of collateral agreement for a small real estate deal. It's to help out my brother-in-law's business, just to secure a line of credit. For this to work, Dad, we just need the name of someone people trust. Someone like you. Collateral. Title. A line of credit. There they were again. Those same words, crawling into my ears like insects. They were words that belonged to another world, another life. And hearing them in my own living room, from my own son, felt like a violation. In that exact moment, as if on cue, the sliding door to the living room opened with a soft whisper. He was standing there, the man from the restaurant. He was dressed in the same kind of immaculate suit, not a single thread out of place, and he wore that same soft, practiced smile. It was a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Arthur, my apologies for dropping in unannounced. I know you're a busy man, and I appreciate you seeing me again. He moved toward the low table where my son and I were sitting. With a gesture that was almost unnaturally smooth, he placed a business card on a polished wood surface and slid it across to me. The instant that small, glossy rectangle of paper slid across the table, something inside me, something I had buried for 30 long years, awoke without a sound. A memory, sharp and cold as a shard of ice, surfaced from the depths. It was a night 3 decades ago. The dead of a Chicago winter. A warehouse tucked away in a grimy, forgotten alley down by the river. The air smelled of diesel fuel and damp concrete. Under the merciless hum of a single, flickering fluorescent light, I remembered being handed a piece of paper, just like this one. But it wasn't a business card. It was a disposal order. A direct instruction from the family. The order was simple. Erase a man. The reason was even simpler. Betrayal. The paper contained everything. The location, the time, even the preferred method. It was just a single sheet, typed out and impersonal. Yet it felt heavier than a man's life. Colder than the steel of a gun barrel. It was a piece of paper that held the power of a final judgment. I remembered my younger self taking one look at that order, my face betraying no emotion. I simply nodded and accepted it. That night, blood was spilled. The promise was kept. And I discarded another piece of myself, another name I once answered to. Ever since that night, whenever I look at a piece of paper, any contract, any document, any official form, I have learned to see the other side. I don't just see the words. I see the motive hidden behind the ink. I don't just see the smile. I see the cold calculation ticking away behind the eyes. And I don't just see a business card as a polite introduction. I see it for what it truly is, a face worn for the public, hiding the true nature of the man who offers it. And now, here was another piece of paper, lying on the table in my home. The printing was crisp and glossy. The title was impressive. The company name was one I'd never heard of. It was designed to look professional, trustworthy, clean, but no matter how neatly those letters were arranged, no matter how respectable it all appeared, my eyes saw something else entirely. To me, this was just another piece of paper designed to move someone's life around like a pawn on a chessboard. I didn't reach for the card. I didn't touch it. I just stared at it, letting the silence in the room grow heavy. I let out a slow, quiet breath and whispered the words inside my own mind. Horsey, here we go again. Sue O.T. 30 years have passed, and a piece of paper can still kill a man. The real estate company's name was unfamiliar, but that didn't matter. I felt no weight behind it, no substance. The card itself was expensive, but the credit it represented, the trust it was supposed to engender, was utterly hollow. It was a ghost. Please rest assured, Arthur, the man said, his voice a smooth, reassuring purr. There is absolutely no risk to you. We only need your name for the preliminary review process. As soon as the paperwork is approved, your name will be removed from everything. It's just a formality." The moment I heard those words, that easy dismissal of consequence, I spoke, my voice low and quiet. "And who in their right mind do you think would believe a story like that?" For the briefest of moments, a flicker of something else crossed the man's face. The smile vanished. It was gone for less than a heartbeat, but I saw it. Then, just as quickly, his professional mask was back in place. He lowered his voice, shifting his tone to one of friendly confidence, as if sharing a secret between two reasonable men. "With your signature, sir, everything will proceed smoothly for Michael and Sarah. Of course, we would be more than happy to show our gratitude for your cooperation in a more tangible way." "I don't want it," I said, my voice flat. I cut him off before he could finish. I reached out, not for his card, but for the stack of loan documents my son had brought, and I closed the folder with a soft, final thud. Michael looked at me, his face a canvas of surprise and confusion. "Dad, you don't have to be so guarded about this. It's not like that. Do you have any idea what this piece of paper really means?" I asked, turning my gaze from the documents to my son. I looked him straight in the eye, searching for something, anything. That told me he understood the ground he was standing on, but I didn't find it. What I saw in his eyes was a cocktail of confusion, anxiety, and a dangerous, desperate sweetness. The desire to believe the story he was being told because it was the easiest path forward. It's no good, I thought. He still doesn't see the world for what it is. He doesn't see the teeth hiding behind the smile. I let my gaze fall back to the stack of papers on the table. Then, slowly, I lifted my eyes again to the man standing before me. My son. The boy I had raised for over 3 decades. All these years, he had grown up strong and healthy, never once causing me any real worry. I watched him go off to college, find a good job, get married. And with each milestone, I stood in the shadows and applauded silently. I couldn't give him grand things. I couldn't give him a world of wealth or influence, but I had given him the one thing I valued most, the one thing I had fought to build for him, a stable, ordinary life. A life of peace. And now, here he was, this boy I had raised, standing in my living room, repeating the empty words of a stranger. He was talking about this house, the home where he grew up, the home where his mother and I had built our lives, as if it were nothing more than an asset on a balance sheet, just a number. I stared into his eyes, searching for a reflection of the man I used to be, but there was nothing there. He was looking at his father, the quiet old man who ran a diner, not at Arthur Rossi, the man who once held the fate of others in his hands. He had no idea how much blood I had to wash from my soul to get to this quiet room. He didn't know the weight of the silence I had carried on my back for 30 years, all in an effort to simply be his father. The fact that he could live his life in blissful ignorance of all that, it was my greatest source of pride, and at the same time, my deepest sorrow. But I didn't glare at him. I didn't raise my voice. I just spoke to him quietly, in the privacy of my own heart. My son, it's better that you don't know about the life I carry on my back. I always wanted it that way. I wanted you to grow into a good man, untouched by that world. And you did. That was enough for me. Chew. But you know, even now, I still want to believe in you. I took a deep, steadying breath and gently closed the file of documents again. I reached for the old teapot sitting on the table, my hand perfectly steady, and poured a cup of warm tea. Not a single drop was spilled. The simple, familiar ritual was an anchor in the sudden storm that had entered my home. I took a final, long breath and slowly pushed my chair back, rising to my feet. "This conversation," I said, my voice calm and resolute, "is over." Without another word, I left them sitting there in the living room and walked back to my own room, closing the door behind me. Later that night, long after my son and his wife had gone, I went alone to the small room where we kept the family altar with Eleanor's photograph. In my hand, I held a small, tarnished ring of old keys. They were the keys to a steel box I hadn't opened in more than 30 years. The box was heavy, stored deep in the back of a closet, buried under old blankets and forgotten things. I pulled it out, the metal cold against my fingers, and wiped away a thick layer of dust. I chose a key, slid it into the lock, and turned. Click. The sound was small, but it echoed in the silent room. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cloth, were a few old envelopes and a single photograph. It was in black and white, but the image it held was stark and clear. A young man, shirtless, his back to the camera. And blooming across the entire expanse of his skin was an intricate, magnificent tattoo of peonies. That young man was me. I stared at the photograph, at the ghost of the man I once was, and I murmured to the quiet room, "Maybe the time has come to show you again." Perhaps the time had come to reveal the back I had kept hidden for so long. Not for my own sake, not to reclaim some lost glory, but to protect my son. To show them who they were truly dealing with. My eyes drifted to the photograph of my wife on the altar. As always, she was just there. Her smile offered no words, no judgment. "I'm sorry, Eleanor," I whispered, "but I can't just let this go. I can't look the other way." That night, I carefully placed the box back in its hiding place in the closet and stood up. I had made a decision. A resolve settled deep in my bones. I would use my back to protect what was mine. 30 years could pass, but maybe the blood in my veins hadn't changed at all. That night, a different kind of air settled over our house. It was heavy and cold. Under the pretense of a family get-together, my son and his wife returned. With them were the brother and 2 other men I'd never seen before, both dressed in dark, anonymous suits. Sarah had prepared dinner, a large pot roast that should have filled the house with a warm, inviting aroma. But no one was eating. The food sat on the table, untouched and growing cold. My grandson wasn't there, and the usual sounds of his laughter were replaced by an oppressive silence, broken only by the loud, rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. It felt less like a family dinner and more like a funeral for smiles. The brother-in-law spread a new set of documents on the table. "Here we have the paperwork regarding the collateral arrangement," he said, his voice slick and professional. "If you and your son would be so kind as to sign here, we can have the whole process completed immediately." My name and Michael's were already printed in neat, black letters at the bottom of the page. I stared at the papers without moving and asked a simple question. "And what exactly do I get out of this?" The man paused for a beat. A slight, almost imperceptible smirk twisted the corner of his mouth. "Should you choose not to cooperate," he said, his voice still calm, "it's possible your son could face legal action for business interference. A lawsuit?" The words were gentle, but the meaning was a steel-tipped threat. "Please, Arthur, I'm begging you. It's just a formality," the man said, that hollow smile plastered on his face again. His tone was soft, his words polite to a fault, but I wasn't listening to his words. I was watching his hands. Under the table, I saw his fingers begin to slowly, methodically, push the corner of the contract across the wood toward me. It was a tiny, deliberate movement, an inch at a time, a silent, physical pressure. It was as if his fingers were saying, "You have no choice now. Just sign it. Each." His voice was polite. His smile never wavered, but his fingertips were moving like the point of a creeping knife. The moment I saw that subtle, aggressive gesture, a thought crystallized in my mind. There is nothing more foul than a threat wrapped in politeness. That small movement, that pressure from his fingertips, sent a jolt of memory through me, pulling me back to the negotiation tables of my past. I remembered men who would kick you under the table while bowing their heads in respect. I remembered men who would apologize profusely while their hand never left the hilt of the blade tucked in their belt. They were all masters of the same dark art, communicating pressure not with words, but with the air itself. I ignored the documents completely. I kept my gaze fixed on his creeping fingertips and replied, my voice quiet but clear. You have no idea how many lives have been broken by a simple formalities like This one, do you? The unspoken pressure was immense. His fingers were speaking a language louder than his words. A threat wrapped in etiquette is the hardest kind to deal with. I felt that truth settle in my gut as I took a slow, centering breath. Then, I stood up. I never wanted my family to see this, I thought, but I will not let a man who doesn't understand the value of a life lay a hand on what is precious to me. As that thought echoed in my mind, I began to slowly roll up the sleeve of my right shirt. The peonies first. Then, at the center of my back, the great crimson lotus. The ink I had sealed away for more than 30 years was quietly revealed under. The warm light of the living room. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw one of the suited men furtively lower his phone, trying to snap a picture. I saw his hand tremble. The past was not gone, and it still had power. I remained silent for a long moment, my sleeve still rolled up. I could feel the gazes of everyone in the room burning into my skin. Then, I felt my son's eyes fall on my arm. His eyes widened, and I saw a tremor run through him. He looked, frightened. Shh. I heard the sharp intake of his breath from the chair beside me. I couldn't blame him. My boy had never once seen this part of me. He only knew me as Dad, the quiet man who ran a diner. He knew nothing of the world I had walked through, nothing of the skin I wore beneath the surface. I turned slowly to face him. I spoke in a soft voice, but my words were filled with an unshakable conviction. Don't make that face. Michael flinched, quickly averting his gaze. I continued. This isn't to threaten anyone. This is a back I only show when I have to protect something. When this house is in danger of being trampled on by outsiders. That is the only time I remember this. My son said nothing. He just bit his lower lip and clenched his hands into tight fists on his lap. I turned my attention back to the man with the contract. The blood had drained from his face, leaving it a pale, waxy color. His eyes darted around the room, and when he tried to push his chair back to stand, his legs stumbled beneath him. What? Hey, wait a minute, he stammered, but his voice was a weak, fading rasp. I took one slow step toward him and said only one thing, my voice low and heavy as stone. If you forget my face, you ask my back. That was all that needed to be said. The living room that night was unnervingly quiet. On any other night, this room would be filled with the sound of my grandson's laughter. The drone of the television would mingle with the clinking of chopsticks and someone calling out for a second helping. It was a space usually filled with the small, ordinary sounds of life. But tonight was different. The only sound was the steady, relentless tick-tock of the clock on the wall. The roast on the table was untouched, the steam long gone from the serving dishes. The silverware lay clean and unused, like props on a stage. Only the tea I had poured earlier still sent up a faint wisp of steam, but even its warmth felt out of place, alien in the cold atmosphere of the room. Is this really my home? The question rose in my throat, but I swallowed it down. To speak it aloud felt like it would break something for good. I just sat in the silence, sipping my tea. The chill in this house had nothing to do with the season. The man couldn't say another word. He left his business card and the documents on the table and fled into the night like a frightened animal. The sound of the front door slamming shut echoed through the quiet house. After that night, everything changed. First, the man, the one who called himself my daughter-in-law's brother, vanished. Without a trace. His office in New York was empty, a ghost space. He left behind a mountain of unpaid debts to several different lenders. I heard later the total was over $20,000. My son went to the police, tried to get a lawyer involved, but it was no use. The contract had been cleverly worded to look like a standard, if risky, business arrangement. There was, the lawyer explained, no clear evidence of criminal fraud. We just don't have the proof, the lawyer had said, his voice maddeningly detached. Without proof, there was no crime. But the damage, the things that were left behind, those were real. The cracks in our hearts, the shattered pieces of trust, the very shape of our family. A few days after the whole affair blew over, Sarah packed a bag for herself and our grandson and left. I can't face you, she whispered, her voice small and broken, before getting into a taxi. Michael left a few days after that. He found a small apartment closer to his job. "I'll come by when things have settled down," he said, trying to smile. But his face was etched with exhaustion, regret, and something new that hurt the most: distance. The morning after my son moved out, I began to slowly clean the living room. The cushions on the floor where no one was sitting anymore. The chairs, still slightly askew from the night before. The morning light filtered through the curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the silent air. I started by taking 2 of the 3 dining chairs and carefully putting them away in the closet. "No need for 3 anymore," I murmured to myself. "Just one person sitting here now." The words weren't for anyone. They just drifted into the empty room and dissolved. I took a damp cloth and gently wiped down the surface of the low table. The wood was smooth and clean, not a single water ring on it. I placed a single teacup on its surface, where 3, sometimes 4 cups used to sit. There was now only one. Strangely, I didn't feel lonely. "This might not be so bad," I said with a small, quiet laugh, and reached for the teapot. The whole sequence of movements felt so natural, so practiced. It was as if I had always been an old man living alone. A deep, settled quiet filled the room. I didn't try to stop any of them from leaving. Maybe I should have, I sometimes think, staring into the empty space in the living room. Maybe I should have begged them to stay. When Michael told me he was leaving, I didn't argue. I didn't blame him. I just nodded and said, "I understand." I just let him go. Was that the right thing to do? I've asked myself that question more than once. But now, sitting here in the quiet, I think I know the answer. Forcing someone to stay by your side is not the same thing as protecting them. Sometimes, because you love someone, you don't pull them closer. You have to make the choice to let them go. If he stayed here, something like this might happen again. He might get swept up in someone else's smooth words, and he might end up hurting someone again, or getting hurt himself. To prevent that, I gave him what he needed most: time and distance to learn how to stand on his own 2 feet. Maybe that was my final duty as his father. I sat on the sofa, looking around the silent living room. No sound from the television, no clatter from the kitchen. Just the wind rustling the curtains and the steady tick-tock of the clock on the wall, a sound that now seemed deafeningly loud. But my heart felt strangely light. It wasn't loneliness, and it wasn't emptiness. It was something else. It was the simple, solid feeling that I had protected what needed to be protected. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I wasn't unable to forgive. It was just that there was a line I could not, would not, let anyone cross. A home isn't just walls and a roof. It's an invisible frame built from trust and silence and resolve. I went to the kitchen, put tea leaves in the pot, and poured hot water over them. Through all the years, after I closed the diner, even after my family left, I have always held on to this one ritual. I make my tea with care. That doesn't change, even when I'm the only one here to drink it. Watching the steam rise from the cup, I found myself talking to my wife in my head. "Well, Eleanor, I bet you never thought things would turn out like this. But I think I did all right. I did the best I could. No one will ever praise me for it. No one will ever understand. But I know that the quiet core of this house, the thing I fought to defend, is something I never let go of." I took a sip of tea and thought to myself, losing things isn't always the end. Sometimes, to protect what truly matters, you have to let other things go. That may be the hardest part of being a father, but still I make my tea, whether anyone is here or not. That is my pride. After finishing my tea, I quietly turned the cup upside down on the tray. Outside, I could hear the wind rustling through the trees. A sliver of light from between the closed blinds quivered on the far wall. No one will pat me on the back. No one will tell me I was right. But I believe, with every fiber of my being, that there wasn't a single lie in the words I chose, or the line I drew in the sand. A quiet in your heart that lets you live with yourself. That, for me, is what pride is. It's not about telling stories of the past or proving yourself to anyone. It's just about whether you can nod to yourself in the silence. That's all that matters for a man who has lived a long life. I think, only now, I'm finally beginning to understand that. Today I am alone. But inside my heart, there is a quiet that no one can ever take from me. That night, when I heard my son had left the house, when that happened, when the final piece of the charade had crumbled away, I didn't hesitate. I picked up the phone and made the call. I want you to come home. Just once. I kept my words short, clipped. On the other end of the line, he was silent for a long moment. Then just a quiet, okay, and the line went dead. The next day, just as the first light of spring was beginning to slant across the backyard, my son, Michael, came quietly through the front door. I didn't say anything. I just nodded toward the back of the house, and he followed me. I led him out to the patio. There, on a small wrought iron table beside a potted camellia, sat a framed photograph of my late wife, Eleanor. "Sit down," I said, my voice low. I placed a single cushion on the cool flagstones of the patio. Michael moved stiffly, awkwardly, lowering himself onto the cushion. He wouldn't look at me. He just kept his eyes fixed on the ground, his shoulders slumped forward. For a long time, the only sound that passed between us was the soft whisper of the wind rustling the leaves in the garden. From the inside pocket of my jacket, I slowly, deliberately pulled out a single, crisp envelope. Inside was a copy of the will I had drawn up years ago. "This," I began, my voice steady, "is something I wrote when you and your sister were still just kids. I made up my mind a long time ago. This house, this land, it would never be used to line some stranger's pockets. It would never be gambled away." I held the envelope out to him. He took it, and I saw that his fingers were trembling as he opened the flap and slid out the papers inside. He began to read, his eyes scanning the lines of dense, legal text. As he read, his shoulders began to shake. A single tear welled up in the corner of his eye. Then another, tracing a slow, wet path down his cheek. "I never knew," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Something this important, nobody ever told me." "You never tried to find out, did you?" I said, my voice not accusatory, just tired. I had set out a single teacup, and now I picked up the old ceramic teapot and began to pour, the stream of pale green tea steaming in the cool morning air. "Your mother," I said, my eyes on the rising steam, "before she died. She only asked me for one thing. Just one. She said to me, 'This house, Arthur, please make sure this house is always here for them. A place they can always come back to, no matter what.'" I carefully placed the warm cup on the patio stones in front of my son. The scent of the tea, clean and earthy, filled the space between us. I continued. "So you see, this isn't just a building. It's not just a piece of property. It's a place we've protected, a place we've passed down. It's a promise." He couldn't hold it in any longer. The tears came freely now, fat drops splashing onto the dusty stones as he sank to his knees, his body racked with sobs. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know it would come to this, that it would. You know," I began, my voice quiet, almost conversational. "A long time ago, I killed a man." Michael's head shot up. His eyes, wide and red-rimmed, stared at me in disbelief, in shock. "It was to keep a promise," I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "The man I killed, he betrayed someone important. He trampled all over something that was sacred. And in that moment, I understood something. I understood that there are some things in this world worth protecting, even if it costs you your life." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle in the quiet air. "But you," I went on, my voice hardening just a fraction, "you were ready to sell out your own father, your own family home, all for a signature on a piece of paper." Michael's lips trembled. He tried to speak, to form some kind of defense, some kind of explanation, but no sound came out. He just lowered his head again, deeper this time, his shoulders shaking with silent, choked sobs. Watching him, I felt no anger. The rage I might have felt days ago was gone, washed away. In its place was a profound sadness, and something else, something I didn't expect. A strange, quiet sense of relief. A feeling that we had, at long last, arrived at the place we needed to be. "It's done," I said, the words feeling final. "It's over now." I stood up and walked over to the camellia bush. I plucked a single, perfect white blossom and gently placed it on the table in front of my wife's photograph. "I don't know if you'll ever come back to this house for good," I said, my back still to him. "But whatever happens, whatever you decide to do from here, don't you dare run from what you've done. Because you can run from everyone else in the world, but you can never run from yourself. You can't lie to the man you see in the mirror." Michael remained kneeling on the patio, his head bowed, his body trembling. After a long, heavy silence, he spoke, his voice a raw, ragged whisper. "Dad, can I stay here tonight?" For a moment I said nothing. I reached for the teacup I had poured for him, lifted it, and took a small sip. The tea was still warm. Then, quietly, I answered him. "You can stay for tonight," I said. "But tomorrow, and all the days after that, you have to figure those out on your own." I didn't look at him as I spoke. My voice was calmer than I expected, devoid of anger or judgment. I wasn't kicking him out, but I wasn't forgiving him either. I was simply telling him that the choice was now his. It was the only thing left for me to do. It was, I thought, my final duty as a father. He didn't move. He stayed there, head bowed, a broken figure in the morning sun. I looked at his back, the same back I had watched grow from a boy's to a man's. And I spoke one last time, my voice softening. "Go home, son. Your wife and your boy are waiting for you." With that, I turned and walked slowly back into the house. On the low table in the living room sat 2 teacups. One was mine. The other, its steam slowly fading into the quiet air, seemed to hold what was left of my hope as a father. That night, I couldn't sleep. Memories of the past flickered through my mind like scenes from an old, forgotten movie, appearing and then vanishing into the darkness. The resolve I felt that night so many years ago, when I took on the weight of another man's life, the past I had kept hidden, now laid bare for the sake of my family, it was all tied up in the heavy weight of a single word: protect. What is strength really? I wondered. Maybe it's not about the weapon you hold in your hand. Maybe it's about learning how to protect people with your words instead. I whispered into the darkness of my room. "Eleanor, you think he'll be all right? Is there still time for him?" A sudden night breeze drifted through the open window, and the wind chimes hanging on the porch sang out with a soft, gentle music. To me, in that moment, it sounded just like her voice, carried from a great distance, nodding, whispering, yes. A week later, I got a call from the police. The man who had disappeared, my daughter-in-law's supposed brother, had vanished without a trace. His trail went cold the moment he left town. They said the name he had given, the address, the company, it was all probably fake. I quietly hung up the phone and let out a long, slow sigh. Behind me, I could hear Michael and his wife Sarah, packing their remaining belongings into boxes, their faces drawn and somber. In the end, the police investigation found some contractual irregularities, but there wasn't enough evidence to press criminal charges. Legally, there was nothing to be done, but in the real world, I was now saddled with a debt of more than $25,000. A heavy weight to carry into my old age. My daughter-in-law couldn't bring herself to say a word to me. She just took my grandson's small hand in hers and walked quietly out of the house. The look on her face wasn't anger, and it wasn't regret. It was a deep, painful mixture of apology and fear. That night, my son stood before me in the empty living room and bowed his head low. "Dad, I am so sorry." There was no lie in his voice. I could hear the sincerity, the raw shame. But all I said in return was a single, quiet phrase. "It's done," I said. "I want your things out of here by tomorrow." Those words were the last ounce of sentiment, the final drop of paternal feeling I had left to give. The next morning, the house felt cavernously large. I left a single chair at the dining table and moved the others into a storage closet. I wiped down the polished wood of the table and placed a single teacup in the center. "No need for 3 anymore," I murmured to the empty room. "It's just me now." My voice, when it came, was surprisingly calm, surprisingly steady. When the neighbors came by, their faces etched with worry, I would just smile and wave it off. Oh, you know, things happened. But the quiet's not so bad, really. And the strange thing was, I meant it. My son was gone. My daughter-in-law was gone. My grandson was gone. But I didn't feel lonely. Not in the way you might think. Instead, it felt as though the blurred edges of my own life were slowly coming back into focus. This house, the one I had built and lived in for so many years, it was beginning to feel like my own again. The air inside was mine. It wasn't a space to show off to anyone, nothing to be proud of in a conventional sense. It was just a quiet place, a stillness that no one could trample on or disturb. Maybe that, in the end, was what my pride really was. A quiet that lets you forgive yourself. A place where you can hold all of your past, the mistakes, the failures, the moments of weakness, and still be able to calmly, peacefully pour a cup of tea. For me, that was more than enough. As the days turned into weeks, the silence of the evenings began to seep into my bones. I'd turn on the television, but the sound of canned laughter from some sitcom would just echo in the empty room, never quite reaching my heart. I'd find myself looking down at the smartphone in my hand, a gift from my son a few years back. I wouldn't be looking for anything in particular. I'd just unlock the screen and scroll through my contacts, my thumb moving down the list of names. And then, it would stop, always on his name, Michael. I wonder if he's doing okay. The words would form in my throat, but I would never let them out. My thumb would hover over the green call button, but every time I would pull it back. What would I even say if I called? I didn't want an apology. I didn't want to lecture him. I just wanted to hear his voice. But I knew that wanting that, acting on that, was wrong. For him, but for me. If I call him now, I'd mutter to the glowing screen, I'll just be proving that I'm a weak old man. I'd close the screen and set the phone down. Having someone turn their back on you is one kind of pain. But betraying your own pride, that's a pain that cuts much deeper. So I don't call. His name is still there, a silent entry in a digital list, but I don't call. It's a strange thing. At first, every breath I took felt like it made my chest ache. The empty dining table, sitting alone in a chair meant for two. The sound of tea being poured, the murmur of the television, it all just echoed in the emptiness. This must be what they call loneliness, I thought. But then, one day, it just hit me. Huh? I'm getting used to the quiet. It wasn't a feeling of anger or sadness or resignation. It was just a simple, quiet thought. I guess this is what it means to get old. I always thought that getting older was about accumulating things. Wisdom, experience, memories. But I was wrong. It's not about gaining. It's about learning to be at peace with what you've let go. That's what it really means to age. I don't need anyone to understand me. I don't need anyone to fill the empty spaces. I'm finally learning how to face this quiet, how to face myself, exactly as I am. And so, I'm okay. I'm doing just fine. I decided to go back to Chicago, back to the city where, decades ago, I learned my craft, and where I eventually stepped into a world of shadows. But this time, it was different. I found a small, forgotten storefront in an old neighborhood, and now I spend my days quietly, teaching young men who are trying to find their own way back to a straight life. I teach them how to make a proper stock, how to handle a knife. No one here knows my past. No one knows the name, Arthur Rossi, underboss of the Moretti family. Here, I'm just Art, the owner. And that's enough. The shop has no name, no fancy sign out front. There's just an old, faded canvas awning that flutters in the breeze. On the front window, someone years ago painted two simple words in white: soup and noodles. That's all it needs. Inside, there are only 6 seats. 3 stools at the counter, and 3 chairs at a small table by the window. This is just the right size, I often mutter to myself as I prep in the morning. Small enough that you can really watch over people. I used to live my life in the middle of a constant roar. Shouting, arguments, negotiations, threats. But now, the gentle aroma of simmering broth and the quiet, slurping sounds of my customers are the most comforting sounds in the world. "This place is like a church, man," one of the young guys said to me once. I just smiled and shook my head. "No," I said, "it's a place to be reborn." My days are simple. I'm up before the sun, long before the city wakes up, starting the broth for the day. At lunch, I serve steaming bowls of noodles. In the afternoons, I teach the young men who show up, serious and determined, how to hold a chef's knife, how to feel the balance of it in their hand. We learn how to draw out the flavor from chicken bones and vegetables together. I never knew, all those years ago, that a life this simple could feel so warm. When one of the boys starts to get the hang of the knife work, when his movements become fluid and confident, I always say the same thing. "All right, that's enough for today. Take a break?" The young man, still sweating from the effort, will just nod silently. I'll pour him a tall glass of iced tea and hand it to him. As he sits on a small wooden stool in the corner of the kitchen, I'll speak to him quietly. "What you're learning here," I'll say, "it's not just how to make soup, it's how to start your life over." They might not understand what I mean right away, but that's fine. Given enough time, surrounded by the scent of good food and the deep, healing quiet of this place, they can start to look at themselves again, and slowly, they can change. No one here judges them. No one rushes them. In this little shop, your past doesn't matter nearly as much as the question of how you're going to live from now on. One evening, just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows down the street, I saw a small figure through the front window. The door opened quietly, and a young boy stepped inside. He couldn't have been much older than 10 or 11. He wasn't carrying a backpack, just a small canvas tote bag. He stood straight, brought his hands together in front of him, and bowed his head respectfully. "Hello, are you my grandpa?" The moment I heard that voice, I nearly dropped the bundle of chopsticks I was holding. That voice, the way he phrased the question, the way he stood there, it was exactly, uncannily, like Michael when he was a boy. The angle of his feet, the way he held his hands, the serious look on his face as he tried to make eye contact. For a split second, I felt like time had rewound, like I was seeing a ghost. Something I had kept locked away deep in my chest, buried for years, suddenly floated to the surface. But this time was different. Back then, all I wanted to do was protect. This time, all I wanted to do was welcome him in. "Come on in," I said, my voice a little rough. "Want some iced tea? It's cold." The boy nodded, a shy smile touching his lips, and he sat down carefully on the stool I offered him. A breeze caught the old awning outside, and a soft, warm light filled the small shop. And in that moment, for the very first time, I thought to myself, this quiet, it's not so bad after all. In his hand was a sealed envelope. "My mom said to give this to you." My hand trembled slightly as I took it from him. I walked to the back of the shop, sat down on a stool, and slowly broke the seal. The letter was from Sarah. "Dad," it began, "I know now how foolish we were that day. I know how much we hurt you. I can't apologize enough. But please, please let me tell our son about his grandfather. Let me tell him that you're a strong, kind man who always stood up for what was right. I want him to be able to be proud of where he comes from, proud of his roots." As I finished reading, I felt a slow, deep warmth spread through my chest. The handwriting was shaky, the words were simple and a little clumsy, but they were filled with a genuine heart. It was a letter where "I'm sorry" and "thank you" were tangled up together. A testament to a clumsy, beautiful kindness. Before I knew it, a single tear was tracing a path down my cheek. I thought I had cried myself dry years ago. I thought all the anger, the regret, the loneliness, I thought I had shed every last tear for those things. But I was wrong. "I guess I still had some left," I whispered to myself. A part of my heart that wasn't completely dried up after all. The tears fell. Silently, steadily. They weren't tears of sadness. They weren't even tears of forgiveness. They were tears of recognition. I was finally seeing something that had been buried deep inside me all this time. A warmth, a simple, desperate desire to still believe in people. I wasn't finished. My story wasn't over. I still had a heart that could shed tears for someone else. And that, I thought, was more than enough. As I traced the words on the page, I felt something hard and cold inside me begin to melt away. I pressed the heels of my hands to my eyes and whispered to the empty kitchen. I see. I don't have to be a gangster anymore. I can just, I can just be a grandpa. Right? Through the doorway, I could see the boy peering into the kitchen with curiosity. How do you make the noodles? He asked. I stood up and smiled. A real smile this time. First thing you do is wash your hands, I said. Listen close now. The most important thing in this kitchen is that you cook with your heart. As I spoke, I filled a large pot with water and set it on the stove, ready to once again fill the small room with the warm, comforting scent of simmering broth. Seeing him sitting there, so polite and proper on the other side of the small table, I was at a loss for words for a moment. He sat with his back straight, his eyes looking directly at me, never wavering. He was the spitting image of his father as a boy. A dull ache throbbed deep in my chest. It wasn't nostalgia, and it wasn't regret. It was hope. Without a word, I boiled some water and poured him a glass of iced barley tea. I cooled this down for you, I said, my voice gentle, so you'd all burn your tongue. As I said the words, I made a decision. I would no longer live my life trying to be useful to someone. Instead, I would choose to live by watching over people, all while protecting my own pride. I wouldn't hide my past, but I wouldn't let it drag me down either. I would just quietly make my soup, offer a cup of tea to whoever came through my door, and, if they needed it, share a few words of advice. That was the kind of life I wanted. Grandpa, can I come back again? He asked in his small voice. I let out a soft laugh. You can come back any time you want to see me, I told him. But in return, I'm going to tell you the real story, little by little, why I'm here, why I make soup. I want to tell you everything. A man can start his life over. I know that now. And I want to teach that lesson not by telling, but by showing. More than anyone, I want to show it to myself. I will continue to live my life quietly, here under the faded awning of this small shop. Not to cut ties with my past, but to live alongside it, and to help support someone else's future. Now that I can finally see that path clearly, I feel like I'm only just beginning to walk the road of an ordinary man. My story ends here. No matter what happened in your past, you can always change. But to change, you need resolve. The resolve to look at your own back in the mirror, instead of pointing the finger at someone else. I no longer need a title or a reputation. If I can just be a memory, a strong back that someone remembers, that is more than enough for me. There was a time when I carried a name, a family, and a certain kind of pride on my back. But now, all I want is to pour everything I am into a single, steaming bowl of soup. Isn't there someone in your life like that? Someone who has supported your family in silence, without ever saying a word? Maybe now, you can finally begin to understand the immense strength hidden in their silence. If you have ever been betrayed by someone in your past, please leave a comment below saying, I want to protect my pride in the here and now, not in the past. Please subscribe to this channel, and I hope you'll continue to listen. I'll keep sharing stories like this, stories that might just help the tears you've never been able to shed finally begin to fall.